Let's build this centerpiece of our 3D printed Sci-Fi mining station terrain. So welcome everyone, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield, and I've got another Blender for tabletop gaming tutorial for you today. And we're working on what you see here on the screen, this mining pit. And of course, this goes along with some of the other sci-fi mining station tutorials I've done recently. Link in the show notes if you want to see those. And of course, toss a like if you like this kind of tabletop gaming, 3D modeling, 3D printing kind of stuff. Now today's tutorial is not going to be a step-by-step one, so it does assume you have some Blender knowledge about how to do basic operations. Instead, I'm going to do an overall workflow of how I built this piece. And the one thing I'm going to focus on in detail is going to be later on where we talk about the rotational symmetry and how I got all the pieces to line up nice and neatly around the outside of this mining pit. So alright, open up Blender and we'll get started. So we want to start first by creating the hexagon. And the hexagon in Blender is just a 6-sided cylinder. So let's add one of those. We'll set it to the size we want it to be. And then I'm going to make a smaller one to cut out the top so I have it looking like there's some sort of liquid in the pit. Then finally I'm going to adjust the sizing of the perimeter to give it some sloped angles. The next step, I want to make sure there's an edge from the outside corner to the inside corner of each of the points on the hexagon. This is so that I can correctly raise up the inside perimeter of the hexagon to give the top of it a little bit of a slope. And to create these edges, we're going to use the most dangerous tool in Blender, the knife tool. Now let's start creating the details that are going to go around the mining pit. When it comes to generic sci-fi terrain, you can get away with a lot with just doing lots of simple geometric shapes, smashing them together and calling it detail. And that's what I'm going to do here. Now for each of these sections of detail, I'm only going to work on one wall of the mining pit, and we'll worry about moving them around to the other 5 walls later on. So for the first one, I'm going to create kind of just another slanted angle piece. And I'm going to stick some cylinders in it to make it look like it's some sort of piping system going off into the ground. And we have 2 flat sides of hexagon, which are either perpendicular or parallel to your main axes. And you want to build your detail on there, because then you don't got to worry about any rotations yet. Now I'm going to do something similar for the pieces that overhang the inside of the pit. But once again, I'm just taking a cube, jumping into edit mode, kind of manipulating the vertices to turn them into a little bit more of an interesting shape, extruding some faces, rotating some things around, just trying to create something that looks, you know, sci-fi. You know, angles and such, that kind of stuff. So what I just built there is very simple, but now watch what happens when I essentially make several copies of it, change some sizes, stick them all together, and you end up with something that's a lot more interesting. And there we go. I think I'm going to make 2 of these per side. One more time, we're going to do something similar, some details. I want to beef up the corners of the hexagons a bit. However, with this piece, I only want to make half of the corner because I'm then going to mirror it to get an exact copy later on. Now I've got one last piece of detail I want to be able to add later on, and that's to make some cutouts along the outside of the mining pit. So now I'm going to build another shape that represents the area I want to cut out from the sides, and then we'll kind of spread those around to wherever they're going to be. Now that we've got a little details here, let's start working with them to make them more of a final product. I'm going to go back to our corner piece here, and I'm going to start by cutting out this detail shape out of the corner object using a Boolean operation. Then, once that is done, I'm going to mirror this piece and wrap it around the corner with that detail cut out. I'll merge those 2 things together, and as usual, when you merge 2 solid objects together in Blender, make sure you remove that internal face. Now we're at the point where we want to start working with rotational symmetry. In this case, I'm going to start with my beefed up corner, and I want to make sure its center is at its own center of mass. To do that, we're going to go up to Object in upper left hand corner, choose Set Origin, and then choose Origin to Center of Mass Volume. And this should put the orange center dot roughly in the middle of its volume. If not, that may imply there's something wrong with your geometry of the object. You've got some non-manifold vertices or something weird like that. Our next step is to duplicate the object, but don't move it. Finally, we want to change the X, Y, and Z locations to match that of the hexagon mining pit, which once again is 0, 0, 0. At this point, I'm going to jump into edit mode. I want to select all the vertices and move the vertices so they now line up with where the object was before we moved it to 0, 0, 0. By moving things in edit mode, what I've done is kept the object center at the center of our rotation. Now it's going to be very easy to rotate this thing around the mining pit and bring in that rotational symmetry. So for a hexagon, 60 degrees of rotation will move an object from one corner to the next. So with this copied corner piece here, if I change the Z rotation to 60, it's going to jump to the next corner. Let's duplicate the object, move it 60 more degrees, and repeat this process until I've gone all the way around the mining pit. 120 is next, then 180, and so on. Let's repeat the process one more time, but I'm going to work with those two overhanging parts. Select all the pieces that make up this object and join it together into one object. Now the two are joined together. Once again, have the center of origin move to center of volume. This should put the center dot somewhere between the two pieces of the object. Duplicate it, but don't move it. Then change the X, Y, and Z to the center of your mining pit, which once again for me is 0, 0, 0. Go to edit mode, select all the vertices, and move these pieces back into the correct place. Then start rotating them around the hexagon like before, adding copies and rotate them 60 degrees around the Z-axis. Repeat this process with the other kind of outside mining piping thing going on, as well as the details we're going to cut out later on. Now, one of the last steps I'm going to do with this piece here is to integrate it with my previous pipeline project. I'm going to take it apart from those pipelines and stick it on two sides of the mining pit, so then therefore you can kind of connect the pipes to this thing and kind of make a much larger structure. So I'm going to delete the details from the two sides that are kind of parallel / perpendicular to our main axis, and I'll worry about those sides details a little bit later. Now I want to cut out all these little details we have wrapped around the mining pit from the mining pit itself. So combine all those little teardrop looking things into one object and do a Boolean operation to cut them out of the mining pit. Now let's go ahead and join all this stuff together into one object. Now we have one more cleanup issue we have to deal with. As you can see here, you got some of the pipes sticking below the terrain piece. We want all the bottom parts of the terrain piece to actually be lined up nice and clean. So we're going to jump into edit mode, select all the vertices that are supposed to be lined up, and do our little scale Z0 trick. Now I'm going to bring in one of the parts from the pipes I built earlier, scale things up, and then kind of stitch that all together. And just for a little bit more character, let's add some bubbles to the mining pit. All I'm going to do is take some spheres, scale them down to different sizes, hide them just below the surface of the pit, and then kind of arrange them so they look like they're kind of pockets or groups of bubbles forming up on the surface. With that, our mining station is done and ready to send it over to your slicer to 3D print it up, 3D print it out, 3D print it, something like that. I'll think about what the right way is to say that, but until then, have a great week.